In this video, we are going to be designing a parameter screen under the cashbook parameter setup. We're going to be designing a screen for the setup of the transaction head. We're also going to be designing a screen for the setup of the transaction subhead, which involves some interesting features, like for example, picking the chart of account to attach to the subhead. By the time we're through, you will have been able to understand a lot about how to do the development work in the Devexpress framework. So we also have the transaction classification, which is just a simple table entry. So the transaction head is the master, while the transaction subhead is the detail, master detail relationship. The first thing you have to do is to locate the presenters required for the interface. Now, I know that this interface, both this and this, all the activities going on in these two places is encapsulated into one presenter. So the first thing is to come here and look at the presenter. Now, this is a typical presenter implementation. If we look at the signature of the presenter, you will see that it requires something like a view to be passed into it, an interface that represents the view, and an interface that represents the repository, which is a encapsulation of the database. As we're moving forward, you will notice some of the presenters will stop passing this into them because in their own implementation, they know how to get to the database. So some of the presenters, you will notice that it's only the view that is passed into it. And the whole of the presenter pattern logic is that it encapsulates your UI into an interface called the view, and you can now write all the logic required in a class regardless of the UI. So if we look at this interface, what does it look like? Sorry, good definition. You will see that it's just a representation of what the UI looks like. Now, this is called transaction head list. It's a list of a particular structure, which is just ID, code, and description. Now, you see this? We can map it to this UI. This is the code, this is the description, this is the code, this is the description, this is a list of code and description and IDs. This is that list of code and description and IDs. Now, anytime you're supposed to edit something is supposed to happen that will allow this to be filled up as your selected transaction ID. Now, let me just show you. These properties are a reflection of the UI at the end of the day. So when you see only a set on them, it means the presenter wants to present something to the UI. So you must be able to set it in the UI. But when you see a get and a set, it means it can switch the other way. The presenter might want to get that UI value from you, and it might want to set it. So these are just the representation of this screen. If we now go to the next screen, which is the transaction subhead, you see this, the list of transaction head. Look at it here. You see this list of items. Look at it here. The code, the description, the chart, they are all mapped here at the end of the day. So the whole idea is that this presenter are the reusable constructs we're going to use to be able to develop our own web interface. So let's start. The first thing that we need to do after locating the presenter is to come to the portal module. I told you that these three projects are the ones that were added by the framework itself. So whatever you do here is global in nature. We will explain that one in more detail when I'm telling you about the framework itself. So, but for now, I want to create the business objects that represent this interface. So we come under cash book, come to add Devexpress item. Now I'm adding a non-persistent object, which I can also pick from here. Non-persistent. And this time around, I'm adding a transaction head view model. I will use the word view model so that by looking at it, I can know that it's not a structure that is talking to the database. The normal Devexpress objects will create tables and talk to the database, but when you choose a non-persistent object, they don't talk to the database. So from the naming convention, everything here that doesn't talk to the database for me is a view model. That's why I'm using view model. So transaction head view model. Now, how do you define the properties in this place? The first thing is, in our own case, our primary key is always an integer, so we don't need this. Then definition of properties comes in pairs. You define the internal one, which for example, here we've already defined this as ID. So the next thing is we want to define the code. Remember, I used small letter for the internals. Then I will use big letters for the name of the property itself, while the internals continue to be in small letters. So property names are in capital letters and the internal fields are in small letters. So I do that for code, I do it for description. So essentially just the code and the description. And if you look at the presenter interface, the view interface, you see this, the code and the description, which is what we need from the view. And for now, we can still leave this one out. When we need it, we will talk about, because we need that when we are editing. But normally parameter tables are not tables that you should allow editing because of audit trail. So once they are created, they are commissioned, they are there. The next thing now is we need to create the transaction subhead view model. The reason why I'm removing, if I don't remove this default class option, it's going to drop this model on the menu, and I don't want it like that. So I have to remove it. And just like that one, I remove the commented part. Then, of course, I know that it is also going to have the code and the description. So you can confidently copy these ones. Now, the interface also has what we call okay. Let us deal with the before we get back to the subhead. Or let's design everything first. Now the subhead, we've done the code and the description. Now we need once we into the code on the back end, I'm able to see what the subhead table is keeping. This cash book sub ledger status is the same for all. So it's the chart code that is stored here, starting with the economic segment. That is why we call it the economic. Okay. So one of the things the subhead interface needs is the subhead interface is going to need something I'm going to borrow from borrow it from tables. Have what we call a value description data object view model. So what this does is that we're going to call this subhead. I'm going to call it transaction head. This is just a structure that shows you is a business object, but it shows you just the code also in the description. So it is the version of this structure from the desktop application. This structure, yes. So the version of it in the web is this structure. So we're going to use it to represent this on the view model of creating of subhead. So this is it. Then I told you properties comes in pairs. So we have the here, then put this as capital. Then this is for the value that is the transaction head. Now, what we also need again is the list of transaction heads. Apart from selecting a value, we need the list of transaction heads. So we're also going to define that in the structure. We call it transaction head list. Right. Now, I told you properties are in pairs. So we'll come back here and take this. This will save me some typing. Now, it's browsable because we don't want it to appear as a list on that view model. You see what I mean in the future. Just put it that any list. Now, let's come back here. Any list that is supposed to serve as a drop down in the interface must be explicitly marked as not browsable. Just put it at the back of your mind. Every list that is serving as a drop down must not be browsable. So the next thing is we're going to define the structure that is going to hold this chart, and it is going to be a structure we define that we actually simulate this interface also. So for now, it is better for us to define it and reference it in the module that belongs to the cache book. So what I mean is, instead of defining it in this folder, since it is something that will be used extensively in the application, we can define it in the general folder, and we'll call it, sorry, So, what is a chart? Essentially, we'll be defining it as something that has mm, fund functional program and view. And since properties are in duplicates, we are going to come here. So these are just the ways of defining properties of the business objects that we eventually dovetail into the interface that we're going to build. So what I will do now is pause this video and end it here. In the next video, I will have designed all the classes and their properties, then we will discuss it moving forward.